August 14th, 2021, 10:37 p.m. Glacier Basin Trailhead, Washington. This is one of those ASMR horror stories whispered like a confession where the trail feels alive. And the deeper you listen, the closer it gets to taking you. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I had driven up from Tacoma with the idea that I would get a late start hike at the Glacier Basin Trailhead just outside of White River Campground, the kind of trail that has enough foot traffic during the day to make you feel safe, but once the sun dips behind the ridges, you start to realize how deep and endless the forest can feel, and how the trees seem to press in closer and closer with every step. It was August 14th, 2021, and I checked my phone clock. Just as I killed the engine, it read 7:42 in the evening. The summer lights still painted everything in gold. But up here at Mount Rainier, the shadows fall fast, and you learn pretty quickly that the mountain has a way of swallowing sound and color. Before you're ready, I told myself I'd just hike a couple of miles up to stretch my legs. Maybe snap some pictures of the last light hitting the Glacier's parking lot at the trailhead. It's almost empty. I counted two other cars, one dusty Subaru, the Colorado plates, and another dark pickup with Washington tags, the kind of truck that looks like it belongs to either a hunter or a maintenance crew. But there was no one in sight. No sound of boots on gravel, no voices, just the hush of the white river somewhere off in the trees. He should have felt relief at the quiet, but instead it felt staged, like when you walk into a room and realize the conversation had stopped a few seconds too soon. I tightened the straps on my pack and slung it up, but that little grunt you make when you know you packed too much for a short hike. I locked the car and clicked the key fob twice just to hear the horn chirp. I don't know why, but the sound felt like the last familiar thing before stepping into something much older and hungrier. The first stretch of trail, a smooth, easy walking dirt mixed with gravel, the kind of path that lulls you into thinking it's going to be a gentle evening stroll. But even then I noticed the air had cooled way faster than I expected. I could still see sunlight on the snowy ridges way up high, but down here the shade felt like early October, and I caught myself blowing fog, even though it was mid-August. Past a wooden trail sign that pointed ahead to Glacier Basin for miles, and another arrow left to Emmons Moraine 2 miles. But what caught my eye was the carving scratched into the bottom corner of the board. Not part of the Park Service work, just gouged in with a knife or maybe a sharp. The letters were jagged, uneven, but I could read them all the same. It said "Turn Back," carved deep enough that splinters of the board still hung loose. I ran my fingers over it, and the wood was fresh, like whoever did it had been there not more than a week ago. Maybe Leslie laughed under my breath because people leave stupid warnings all the time. Graffiti in bathrooms or spray paint on bridge underpasses. And most of it's just kids playing horror games with strangers. But something about this message didn't feel like a prank. It felt like a voice that didn't care if you thought it was a joke or not, a voice that wanted you to know it had already seen how your night was going to end. He thought about turning around right there, but the river was calling with that constant low roar. I knew the basin had the best views of the glacier, especially in fading light. So I pushed on, telling myself I'd only go another millis. I hiked. The forest grew thicker with towering fir and cedar trunks, and the air smelled sharp with sap and wet moss. The trail narrowed and twisted like a spine, and every so often I heard things in the underbrush that didn't move like deer or squirrels, but heavier, slower, as if something was pacing me just far enough out of sight, he told myself. It was just the echo of my own steps bouncing weird between the trunks. But deep down I knew the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't mirroring me. It was waiting me out. When I stopped, the sound stopped. Tui crouched, pretending to tie my bootlaces just to listen harder, and that's when I heard it faint but clear, a whistle to short notes rising, then falling like someone trying to call a dog. Only it didn't echo, it just slid between the trees and clung there. I stood up fast, my heart hammering in my chest, and I spun slow circles, looking for anyone on the trail ahead or behind, but the path was empty. No hikers, no dogs, no kids. Just the hush of the trees, he told myself. Maybe the people from the super were up ahead and playing around. Maybe they had a camp set up near the basin. But the air didn't hold the chatter of campers or the clank of stoves or the snap of firewood. It just held that whistle still replaying in my head. He tightened the straps on my pack and forced myself to keep walking, each step crunching louder than I wanted, each breath sounding too much like panic. By the time I reached the small clearing with the footbridge over the creek, the last light was gone. The sky above the ridges had gone purple, and the trees had swallowed everything else. I took out my phone to check the time. It read 8:19, and the signal bars were gontits when I saw something carved into the bridge railing, the same jagged letters gouged deep again. Turned back, only this time the carving was darker and wet like the wood itself was bleeding. I leaned against the railing of that narrow footbridge. I kept staring at those gouged letters. Turned back, the words seemed to pulse in the dim light, as though the wood itself wanted me to notice more than just the shape of the cuts. I brushed my hand across them, and the moisture smeared against my palms, sticky and cold, and for a second I thought about blood, but it smelled like iron mixed with river water, not like sap. Not like anything from a tree. I looked down through the slats of the bridge at the creek that rushed beneath, frothing white against jagged rock. For a flicker of a moment I saw movement, not the flow of water, but something standing still inside the current. Pale shape that didn't shift with the waves. It was bright like a figure, shoulders narrow, head tilted, and though the water was crashing fast around it, the thing did not move. I blinked and it was gone, and I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the fading light. Me boots thudded hollow on the boards as I crossed the bridge, and on the far side the trail rose steeply into thicker forest. Canopy above woven tight enough to blot out most of the sky, so that even though it was barely past 8, it looked and felt like midnight. The path turned to dark dirt slick with roots, and I had to watch every step, but still I felt eyes on me, pressing against the back of my neck. Halfway up that grade I heard the whistle again. This time closer, to short notes rising, then falling, and then another after it, a different pitch, lower and drawn out. The second whistle came from the opposite side of the trail, so close that I spun in a half circle, nearly losing my footing. But again the woods were empty, just shadow on shadow and my own ragged breath. Angie told myself not to run because running makes you pray. and prey doesn't come back from the woods, but my legs had other ideas, and before I knew it, I was moving fast, pounding steps up the trail, back bouncing with each stride. Rounded a bend and almost slammed into a rock outcropping where the trail narrowed again. I froze because leaning against the stone was a backpack not mine, not like mine. Either it was sun-bleached canvas ripped at the seams and dark-stained. I crossed the bottom like it had been lying out in weather for years, but the straps were bright. Like someone had set it there recently, waiting for me to find Edie crouched and touch the fabric. The 2 fingers, and it was damp, cold, and soft with. And as I pulled my hand back, a chunk of the shoulder strap peeled away like wet paper. And that's when I smelled it, the unmistakable reek of decay, not fresh death, but something long past gone, the way a deer carcass smells when it's been buried in snow, then thawed in spring. The forest had gone silent except for that stink. I couldn't even hear the creak anymore, only the thudding of my heart, and then just as sudden, the silence broke with a new sound, not a whistle, not an animal, but the sharp snap of a branch from somewhere uphill ahead of me, heavy enough to be a person, or something larger, and then the slow, deliberate crunch of footfalls. He yanked out my phone again to use the flashlight, but the screen stayed blacked. Wouldn't wake up, though I swore the battery had been near full when I left the car. I jabbed the power button uselessly and cursed under my breath, but the only light was the faint silver sheen of the rising moon barely cutting through the canopy. Backed away from the ruined pack, leaving it slumped against the stone. I pressed forward on the trail because going back past the bridge felt impossible. My gut told me that whatever had whistled was waiting on that side till I moved slow, careful, steps trying to stay quiet, but the trail betrayed me with every crunch of gravel, every shift of root beneath my boots. The sound of those other steps followed. Sometimes ahead, sometimes to the side, and once I swore I heard them behind me even though I had not seen anyone pass. My chest felt tight and the cold in the air deepened, until every exhale was a cloud hanging in front of my face. The trail opened suddenly into a small, clearing ring with towering firs, and at the center was a fire pit, made of stones blackened with ash, though there was no fire, no ember, no warmth. Just the faint scent of smoke, as if the flames had been doused minutes before I stepped through. I circled the pit and found shapes carved into the stones, not letters. This time with crude spirals gouged deep, swirling inward, so that the ashen side seemed to fall into them. He crouched low to trace one of the carvings. As my fingertip touched the cold stone, I heard it again, the whistle, but this time it came from right behind me, so close I felt the breath of it stir the hair at the back of my neck. He spun with a yell, swinging my flashlight, even though it was still dead weight in my hand. But there was nothing in the clearing, no one between the trees, no movement, except the shiver of branches high above, in the windless sky, and yet the whistle lingered not in the air, but in my own chest, vibrating through my ribs like it had sunk inside me, and was waiting to be let out. I stayed crouched there in that clearing, one knee on the dirt, beside the dead fire pit, my breath shaking out of me in clouds, and that whistle still echoing inside my chest. And the longer I knelt, the more it felt like I wasn't just hearing it, but remembering it, like a tune I already knew before tonight. And the thought chilled me worse than the eerie. Forced myself to stand And when I did, the trees around the clearing looked taller than before, as if the trunks had stretched higher while I was bent over and the night sky had shrunk into a thin ribbon above the branches. A narrow slice of moonlight swaying with each gust of shadow the forest seemed to breathe. I told myself, keep moving, don't give the dark a chance to root you in place, so I chose the exit trail opposite the way I'd come, and I walked with shoulders stiff and fists clenched around the dead phone and the weight of my pack digging into me. I counted each step to keep myself steady, 1, 2, 3, 4, and somewhere around 67 the counting broke, because I saw something pale on the side of the trail, and I stopped, but it was a jacket, no body inside. Just a jacket hung from a branch sleeve, stretched out like it was reaching, and the fabric was shredded. Down the back, long clawed rents that looked too clean to be weathering the way cotton tears. When it is yanked fast and hard, I touched it, and it fell limp against the trunk, damp cold, smelling of earth and moldy, backed away, and that was when I heard it again. Not a whistle, not footsteps this time, but a voice, a low dragging voice that croaked my name, and not a guess, not a shout. In the dark it said my actual name plain, as if someone who knew me was standing no more than 10 feet away and calling softly, so only I could hear. My stomach dropped and my vision tunneled, and I spun in every direction, searching the trail, the underbrush, the canopy above, but all I saw were shapes that might have been trunks or might have been shoulders hunched against the night, and the voice did not repeat itself, but the air still hummed with the fact that it could. He stumbled forward faster, because to stay still felt like consent to something I didn't want to face, and soon the trail bent again, and the ground grew steeper until I was climbing a switchback, and the sound of rushing water returned, faint at first, then stronger, until I realized I had circled near the White River again, though from a higher vantage, and in the moonlight the current below looked wrong, not silver, not shimmering, but black, matte black, like oil sliding over stone. Smell hit necks, heavy and sour like meat left out in the sun. The air was cold enough to sting my skin, and when I reached the top of the switchback, I saw another clearing, but this one was different. It had no fire pit, no signs of hikers. Instead, there was a ring of stones taller than my knees laid out in a circle, and within the circle, the earth was torn up raw like something had been dragged over it again and again until the ground was bald and scarred. At the center of that circle stood a tree stripped of bark, bone white, and carved from its roots to its highest reachable branch, with more spirals, the same design from the fire pit repeating endless around its trunk, and each spiral was darkened like ink or blood. I swear some of them glistened in the faint light. He wanted to turn back, wanted to retrace every step and run straight to the car and slam the doors and peel down the mountain, but my legs carried me closer to that tree as if pulled, and the closer I got, the louder the air seemed to vibrate, until I realized it wasn't air at all, but a chorus of those whistles, weaving in and out of each other, some high, some low, circling around me, though no lips blew them. He reached the white tree and laid one hand on its surface, and the cold shot through my palm like I'd grabbed iron in the dead of winter, and the spiral seemed to writhe under my touch, and I jerked back, but my hand was marked with dark residue lines curling across my skin in the same pattern, etched in the wood. The whistle stopped all at once. The silence dropped heavy and absolute, And then I felt it, a breath on my shoulder, hot against the freezing eerie turn, and there was nothing but the dirt inside. The circle shifted, as if something had just stepped out of it. The dirt in that circle shifted again, and I swear I saw the outline of a bare footprint press into the soil, toes splayed, heels sinking deeper than it should have, like whatever weight was behind it was heavier than a person should ever be. I staggered back out of the ring, my pack snagging on one of the stones, and I nearly toppled. But I ripped myself free and stumbled into the tree line, my pulse slamming in my throat. The forest felt alive. Every branch, every trunk, every patch of moss seemed to lean toward me, and my boots slid on the slope as I forced myself downhill, not caring about the noise anymore because silence had already betrayed me. I barreled through brush, snapped twigs underfoot, and the entire time I could hear it behind me. Not running, not hurrying, just that steady weight pressing step after step as if it knew it would never need to rush. The trail dropped near a fallen log, and I vaulted it, scraping my shin. But I didn't stop. The pain barely registered. I landed wrong and staggered, and as I caught myself, I looked back over the log, and the moonlight showed me something that froze my chest solid. The white tree was gone. The clearing looked empty behind me, like it had never existed. No ring of stones, no spirals, no barkless trunk, just more forest and dark shapes of firs crowded together, and I wanted to scream. But the sound caught, because if it could disappear like that, then maybe I was already inside. Whatever it wanted me to see shoved forward, gasping, air in ragged pulls, until I reached a stretch where the trail widened and leveled. I bent double, hands on my knees, sucking breath, trying to calm myself. In the quiet that followed, I heard something new, not whistling, not footsteps, not a voice calling my name, but the sound of running water again, steady, constant, close. When I lifted my head, I saw that I had somehow looped back to the same narrow footbridge. The turnback carved into the Relenji, swore under my breath, and spun in a full circle, scanning for landmarks, but the trail behind me looked identical to the one ahead. My compass app wouldn't load, and the moon had climbed higher, shifting the shadows into different patterns. Nothing lined up the way it should. Walked to the middle of the bridge and looked down at the creek. And again the water looked wrong, not clear, not glacial, but murky black, carrying shapes that bobbed in and out of sight. Sacks of cloth, or maybe bodies swollen with the current. I leaned closer, gripping the rail, and that was when I saw the pale figure again. This time closer, almost beneath the bridge, standing motionless against the current, head tilted back, as if looking straight at me, though I couldn't make out features, just blank whiteness where a face should be. Lurched back, my boots skidding on the boards. My shoulders slammed into the railing, and the whole bridge shook like something heavy. I leapt onto it from beneath. The planks groaned, wood creaked, and the bolts screeched against stone anchors. I dropped low, pressing one hand flat against the boards. I could feel it moving under me, not water, not logs, but deliberate shifting like hands. Testing the underside of the bridge, I crawled backward until was off the planks and back on solid dirt, and as soon as my boots hit the soil, the shaking stopped sudden and clean, like nothing had happened. I backed farther into the trees until the bridge was only a pale outline in the moonlight. It was when I smelled smoke again, faint, drifting through the underbrush. I turned toward it, desperate for some sign of people, and I pushed through thick brush branches, clawing my arms until the smell grew stronger and I saw the glow of orange between. The trees stumbled into another clearing and froze because there was a campfire burning low. In steady ring by stones, and around it sat three figures cross-legged, unmoving, their backs to me, shoulders hunched in perfect stillness like statues. They didn't turn, they didn't stir, the flames licked upward without sound. I realized the smoke wasn't rising, it was falling, curling down into the soil. Like mist rolling in rivers, a whispered hello voice cracking, and not one of the figures. Answerity stepped closer, and the firelight showed their faces like mouths, open eyes pale, as milk and skin stretched to thin, like they had been sitting there for weeks or months. Yet their chests rose and fell, faint, shallow breaths keeping time with the flicker of the flames, and then in the space of a heartbeat, all three turned their heads in unison and opened their mouths wider, and from inside each mouth came the same note whistle rising and falling. I staggered back from the fire because the sound of that whistle rising out of their throats, all three in perfect unison, rattled through me like nails in a jar, and the smoke kept sliding downward into the dirt as though the earth itself was inhaling. When their heads snapped back toward the flames, I bolted into the tree's branches, tearing at my sleeves, the forest ripping against me, like it was trying to hold me, crashed downhill away. From the clearing, I didn't care about trail markers. Anymore, I didn't care if I twisted an ankle or shredded my knees on stone. I just needed to get out. I needed the safety of the lot, the familiarity of my car headlights, anything that wasn't this. And I barreled until the trees broke, and I found myself standing in a wide open meadow, the moonlight pouring across it like silver water. The meadow stretched farther than I expected. No sign of trail, no sign of river, just grass waist-high shifting, though there was no wind and the silence lay so heavy that each step I took sounded wrong, too loud, too deliberate, and halfway across the field, I realized the blades weren't just grass, they were thin, pale stalks, brittle to the touch. And when I broke one in my hand, it wasn't planet. It was bone bleached dry, small, like finger bones. Jutting up from the soil, the entire meadow rippled faintly as if whatever lay beneath was moving. I sprinted, stumbling, tripping over the brittle stalks that cracked like twigs, and I didn't look down again. I just fixed my eyes on the far tree line, and I threw myself into it and collapsed against the nearest trunk, chest heaving, lungs burning. When I lifted my head, I realized I was back on the trail again, the same trail I had left behind. And the dirt by my boots was the same ruin-packed, sun-bleached canvas with dark stains, as though I had never left it behind on the climb before. My hand shook as I reached into it, even though every nerve screamed not to, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like the pack was bait and I had already taken the hook inside. Was a journal, small leather-bound, water warped with swollen pages. I flipped it open, and though the ink had blurred, I could still make out writing, desperate, shaky lines scrawled across the paper, the words repeated again and again: turn back, turn back, turn back. And then on the final page, a sentence clearer than the rest, carved in with pressure that tore the page fibers. We're not alone on this trail. He dropped the book like it had burned me in. As it hit the ground, the whistle came again, but not from behind this time, from above, and I looked up to see shapes perched in the trees. Long pale limbs wrapped around branches, faces, blank featureless bodies. as the figure in the reverie froze staring up at them. Too many to count, maybe 6, maybe 12, all watching, and the sound of that whistle fell from them together, weaving in harmony, and the vibration in my chest returned stronger. I clutched my ribs, feeling like something inside me wanted out like my lungs. My voice wasn't mine anymore. I forced my legs to move. I forced myself back down the trail, and the shape stayed above me, sliding branch to branch without sound, like pale shadows tracking a deer. And the forest warped around me, the trunks wider, the canopy heavier, the path bending into angles that didn't match the map in my head. After what felt like hours, I stumbled onto gravel, and my heart leapt because I thought I'd found the lot. But when I looked closer, it wasn't gravel, it was bone splinters. Thousands of them crunching underfoot, and laid out at the center was a circle of car doors, twisted, rusted, pried from vehicles, and jammed right into the ground. Like crude Tomstonese, one had words carved into the metal. Scratch deep, turn back, over and over until the steel peeled and curls. He heard a new sound, then fainted first like an engine rumble, and I nearly wept with relief, thinking maybe the truck from the lot had returned. But as the sound grew, it wasn't an engine at all. It was breathing low, deep guttural inhalations rolling through the trees from every direction, surrounding me, swallowing the night. And from the corner of my eye, I saw headlights flicker on pale yellow beams cutting through the trunks. But they were too high off the ground, far too high, and the beams didn't shine. They searched like eyes, sweeping side to side, locking on me with a weight that pinned me where I stood. Those beams swayed left and right like giant eyes hunting, and each time they passed across the trunks, the bark peeled away, as if the light itself was skinning the forest. The sound of that breathing shook the ground under my boots, deep inhalations that felt like the mountain itself was drawing me in, and the pale figures in the branches tilted their heads farther until their necks looked snapped, their bodies dangling like broken marionettes, yet they clung to the trees without effort. Their whistles rising in harmony with the breathe dropped to my knees, covering my face against the glare of those beams. But the light seeped through my fingers and painted red lines across my skin like veins pulsing, and I could feel the same spiral marks spreading up my arm from where I had touched the white tree earlier, crawling under the surface. Like ink injected into my veins, I tore at my sleeve, trying to rub it out. But the lines only burned brighter. Breathing grew closer, and the air tasted metallic like rust, like pennies, and the car doors around me shuddered, as though something enormous brushed against them. I forced myself to crawl across the bone-littered ground, cutting my palms on shards, trying to find a break in the circle of doors. But every angle I turned showed another rusted panel, another gouged warning. Turn back, the words glowing faintly in the moonlight. I slammed my shoulder against one of the doors, trying to push it over, but it would not budge. It was rooted into the earth deeper than its own metal should allow, and as I hit it again, I felt hot air blast against my back, a breath so strong it lifted dust and bone fragments into the air, and I knew it was standing right behind me. Though the ground did not quake with its weighty spun, expecting to see something enormous towering at those eyes of light. But what I saw was worse. It was a figure no taller than me, but stretched to thin skin, pale tight across a frame that bent wrong. its arms too long, hands dragging in the dirt, its face blank save for two hollow sockets, glowing yellow like headlights, and its mouth a torn slit whistling the same to-note call I had heard since the bridge. I lurched closer without sound, its feet not moving but still in advance like the air itself carried it. I stumbled back, slamming into the car door, ring again pinned between rusted steel. In that blank face I lifted my dead phone like it was a weapon and screamed at it to stay back, and somehow it froze, head tilting, like it was curious at the sight of the object. You don't know why, but I pressed the power button again, even knowing the battery was gone. And this time the screen lit faintly, a glow weak but real, and the creature recoiled like the light burned at its whistle, fractured, breaking high and low. And the figures in the trees above shrieked in dissonance, sizing the chance I shoved sideways, squeezing through a gap where the doors leaned just enough, and I tore myself free, stumbling into more forest branches, whipping my face. I didn't look back, I didn't dare. I just ran until my lungs seared and my throat tasted blood. The woods thinned suddenly, and I tripped into a gravel path, real gravel this time, not bone. And when I lifted my head, I saw reflective signs glinting in the moonlight, trail markers, real ones pointing back toward White River Campground. My chest heaved with hope. I forced my legs to move again, but the hope died quick because as I followed the markers, the path bent and twisted until I found myself staring once more. The same wooden trail sign from the start, Glacier, Basin for miles, Emmons Moraine to miles. And beneath it the carving raw, fresh, and still splintered, turned back and smeared across the dirt. At its base was a handprint, dark wet fingers dug deep, like something had braced itself there only moments before. I stood staring at that sign and the fresh handprint beneath it, and my chest rattled with a sob, because I knew the trail had folded me back like a sheet of paper, trapping me in the same corner. Again and again I kicked at the dirt, I shouted, I begged the trees to let me go, my voice breaking and echoing in the canopy. And for a moment the forest actually answered back, but not with the words, with the whistle drawn out low. And deep from every direction he gripped the straps of my pack and forced myself forward past the sign, back onto the trail, because standing still felt like surrender. I followed the path even though I knew where it would end, and the night pressed heavier. With each step the cold so sharp it cut through my jacket. My teeth chattered and my breath came out in long clouds that hung too long in the air, like they refused to vanish. The forest grew wrong, the trunks leaned inward, bent in arcs, met above me like ribs closing into a cage. The ground softened, spongy with moss and mud that squelched under my boots. And when I looked down, I realized it wasn't mud at all. It was hair, matted dark hair, pressed into the soil as though the trail itself was woven from what had been shed or taken from something. Still breath and she gagged, but I kept moving because behind me the air was shifting. I could hear the scrape of long fingers dragging through the underbrush, following slow, patient. And I couldn't bear to turn around again. The whistle returned higher, now faster, more urgent, like it was calling to something else further ahead. And soon the whistle was answered. Up ahead beyond the bend I saw flickers of light, not moonlight, not headlights this time, but lantern glow, soft yellow swaying, and I broke into a run, desperate, chasing it, and the lantern bobbed farther, just out of reach. I called out, "Hello, please help," but the only answer was the faint crunch of gravel. Beneath the lantern's unseen Carreri burst into another clearing, and there it was, a wooden trail shelter, the kind with 3 walls and a roof open to the front lanterns. Hung on nails inside their glow steady, casting shadows across the interior. On the floor laid rows of sleeping bags, each one zipped up tight shapes. Inside, rising and falling with breath, I stumbled closer, whispering to them, begging for help, asking if anyone was awake. But as I stepped across the threshold, I realized the bags weren't moving. Because of breath, they were moving because something inside them was shifting, writhing, pressing against the fabric like hands and knees trying to push their way out. The zippers buckled from inside. One of the bags split open, spilling dark fluid, and a pale, unslick, and jointed wrong clawed its way free. I staggered back and tripped over another bag, and as I hit the ground, the lantern light flickered, and all at once every zipper ripped, and the shelter filled with that whistle, that chorus screaming from within the sack's pale shapes, tearing out like larvae shedding skin. He crawled backward through the dirt until I was outside again, sprinting down the trail without direction, and the whistle followed louder now, carried on the wind itself, the sound of hundreds, maybe thousands, pouring through the forest like the trees themselves were exhaling. Yet the canopy above parted suddenly. I skidded to a stop because the sky was wrong. The moon was gone, replaced by a spiral of light, white and endless, twisting downward like the markings carved into the tree and into my arm, and I felt the pull of it tugging at my chest, as though my ribs were opening like the zipper of one of those bags. He clutched at my back. I screamed into the trees, but my voice came out as a whistle to notes, rising and falling, and the sound wasn't mine at all. The whistle that tore out of me wasn't mine. It vibrated through my teeth and rattled in my skull. When I clamped a hand over my mouth, the sound still came out muffled, like it was rising from my lungs on its own. I stumbled backward into the trees, away from the spiral above, but every branch bent toward that light. Every trunk curved as if pulling the entire forest, stretching and groaning, pulled upward into the endless coil. The marks on my arm burned, and when I yanked back my sleeve, I saw the spiral spreading across my skin, curling up my wrist to my elbow, glowing faintly like embers, and the sight of them made the air around me shimmer, as if the forest wasn't solid anymore, as if it were painted on glass, and something on the other side was pressing against it. He ran, but the trail no longer followed the mountain. The dirt rolled and twisted under my boots like the spiral itself had laid claim to the ground, each step sending me sideways and downward until I was sliding through underbrush, hands clawing at roots that felt more like veins pulsing under my grip. I tumbled into another clearing and skidded to a stop, my palms scraped raw, my knees bleeding. At the center of this clearing was something worse than the white tree, worse than the car door ring. It was a pit wide and bottomless, the earth torn open in a perfect spiral like a drain. From its depths came the sound of breathing again, each inhale dragging the trees toward it, each exhale rattling the stones. I could see scraps of cloth tumbling inside crushed packs, boots, bones circling downward, as if gravity belonged to this wound instead of the sky. I stepped back, my boots teetering on the edge, dirt crumbling under me, and I nearly fell. In me for catching myself on a route, I stared into the black and saw shapes rising, not climbing, and crawling, simply rising, weightless, pale limbs, jointed, wrong faces, without eyes or mouths, drifting upward as if the breath exhaling from the pit was giving them form, spiral in the sky and the spiral in the earth lined perfectly like a mirror. I realized I was standing at the center, caught between them like meat stretched on a hook. I clutched the straps of my pack, desperate for anything human, and inside I heard something rattling the journal I had dropped before, now wedged between gear. Though I hadn't put it back inside on my own, I yanked it out, hands shaking. And when I opened to the first page, the words were new, the handwriting. Dag different, but it spelled my name. Page after page filled itself. As I stared, each line written before my eyes, describing every step I had taken that night. The bridge, the carvings, the clearing, the fire pit, the pale figures, even the way I touched the white tree and stained my skin, and at the very end the sentence broke off mid-word, and the pen stroke continued past the margin, bleeding out of the paper and into my arm, as if my veins had become the inky scream and ripped the book away, tossing it into the pit. And as it fell, I heard laughter faint, and then echoing upward, not mine, not human, just a chorus of whistles, twisting into something like amusement. Pale figures below, stretching their arms toward me as though thanking me for returning their story. The ground lurched. I fell forward, catching myself just shy of tumbling into the black, the pulse stronger now. Like the pit had chosen me, the spiral overhead tightening. Faster threads of light bending down the two ends, almost touching, ready to close me inside for a very turn, and bolted with the last strength in. My legs crashing through brush, ignoring the branches that whipped my face and tore my jacket. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move before the spirals met and sealed me inside, and then suddenly the trees thinned. I burst into open air, stumbling onto gravel and pavement, real pavement. The parking lot of the trailhead, the Subaru still sitting there, the pickup still. Then my car sitting exactly where I had left it, my headlights reflecting the moon for a moment. I thought I had escaped. I dropped to my knees, sobbing with relief. The taste of iron still sharp in my mouth. I staggered toward the driver's side, fumbling for my keys, and then froze because on the hood of my car, carved deep into the paint, were the same spirals, and in the center of the hood where the lines met was one phrase scratched again and again until the steel itself buckled turn. Back and from inside my car I heard the whistle to notes rising and falling, waiting for me to open the door. The whistle coming from inside my car made every hair on my body stand straight. I staggered back from the driver's side door, my keys clattering from my hand onto the gravel. I bent to grab them, but froze halfway down because the whistle wasn't just sound, it was vibration rattling through the frame of the car itself. Like the whole shell was a throat, and I knew if I touched it, the sound would move into me again. I looked around, desperate for anyone, for light, for help, but the parking lot was wrong. It was larger than before, stretching out in every direction with row after row of cars. All of them dark, all of them covered in spirals carved into their doors. Their hoods, their windshields shattered in curling patterns, and some of them still had shapes inside, slumped in the driver's seats or pressed against the glass faces. Pale eyes, open mouths wide like they had been caught mid-scream, but no sound came from them. only the whistle vibrating faintly in rhythm from each frame. I staggered between the rows, calling out, but my own voice came out twisted to notes rising and falling. I clutched my throat, shaking my head, screaming no, but it was all whistle now. The spiral had stolen my voice, entire lithe lot lights above flickered on tall lamps humming, but instead of steady beams they shone down in spirals, coils of light, spinning across the asphalt, drawing me deeper with each pulse. I tried to shield my eyes, but the glow burned into my lids, and each time I blinked I saw the white tree edge behind my vision, its spirals bleeding across my sight. He stumbled into the row where the pickup had been parked, and I froze again because the truck was gone. In its place was a hole, a perfect spiral bore into the asphalt, leading straight down into black, and from it rose the smell of rot mixed with smoke, the same smell from the clearing fire pit, and the sound of breathing rolled upward deep, slow, filling my chest until I was choking on it. The Subaru was still there, at least I thought it was, but as I approached I saw the doors gaping open and the seats inside shredded to ribbons, the interior coated in dark stains, glistened under the spiral lot lights, and sprawled across the roof, carved in massive letters, were the same words turned back, gouged so deep the steel peeled up like curls of skin. He stumbled back against another car one I didn't recognize, and when my shoulder hit the glass, the window gave with a soft hiss, not shatter, not break, just melt, and the spiral mark spread out across my jacket, burning into the fabric, and I screamed soundless because the whistle had stolen my breath to my chest, heaving silently as the lot filled with the chorus of cars vibrating in unison. The ground shook, faint at first, then stronger, each row of cars shifting toward the center of the lot, like the asphalt itself was sloping, the spirals and the lights tightening overhead, pulling everything down to one spot. And I knew if I didn't run now I'd be crushed into that center with the rest of them. He bolted, my boots slipping on gravel, my vision swimming with spirals, the rows closing in on either side, the headlights of dozens of cars flaring on all at once, beams sweeping across me, locking on me, pressing me forward toward the only gap left at the far end of the lot, a dark opening between two warped firs that bent together like a doorway. Sprinted through it, lungs raw, legs burning, and the instant I crossed I knew I hadn't left the mountain at all, because the ground under my boots was no longer pavement, it was dirt again, and the sound of the white river rushed faint in the distance. When I turned back to see if the lot had followed, there was nothing, only trees swaying, and the trail sign standing lonely in the moonlight, carved deep with that one phrase, "Turn back," and this time below the words was another message, fresh carved, still bleeding splinters, spelling out my name. The sight of my name carved into that sign froze me harder than the cold. The letters, fresh splinters, still clinging like the knife had just left the wood. I felt my stomach twist because it meant the trail knew me. It had been waiting for me long before I ever parked my car or set my boots on the dirty, staggered back, gripping my back like it could shield me, and the river roared louder now, though when I looked toward the sound, the trees bent away as if hiding what flowed beneath, and I could see glints of water, but the surface turned black, and pale shapes rolled inside, carried in loops like driftwood. Though I knew they were not logs, each shape turning slow, each face blank, and eyeless heads tilting as if listening for the whistle that had once been mine. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the sound still came from inside me, vibrating low, rattling my ribs, pulling at my lungs. I dropped to my knees screaming, though no scream came, only the whistle again, louder, sharper, bouncing between the trunks until the whole mountain answered with a chorus, thousands of voices, weaving the same two notes into a spiral of sound. Trees shattered and leaned together, trunks warping, twisting into arcs that met above my head, forming the same spiral shape I had seen in the sky, branches groaning, roots tearing free of soil, as they bent closer and closer until I was caged in the pattern itself, and the ground beneath me cracked and split open in lines that curved and coiled until they met in a black center yawning wide. I scrambled backward, but the dirt shifted like a slope, drawing me toward the hole, and in its depths I saw lanterns glowing, not warm, not real, their light falling downward instead of rising, and between them pale faces drifted closer, jointed limbs reaching upward, hands opening in silent invitation, every mouth puckered into the shape of that whistle calling me home. I dug my nails into the soil, trying to hold on, but the dirt peeled away. It spirals like pages torn from a book in the journal I had thrown into the pit. Before tumbled out, landing beside me, open to a blank page, my name etching itself letter by letter into the fibers, and beneath it words forming slowly, not from ink, but from blood seeping up through the paper. The sentence reading, "You belong to the trailie." Tried to rip the page out, but the paper fused to my skin, crawling up my fingers, the spiral lines burning into my palm until my hand was no longer mine, and the mark spread fast, erasing up my arm to my chest, carving across my ribs, and I screamed again. But all that left me was the whistle, endless, rising and falling, trees bent lower. I saw faces in the bark, pale, stretched eyes, closed mouths, open and silent screams, each one a hiker who had walked too far, each one locked inside the wood, staring without sight. And I understood then that the trail had no end, only a mouth, only a hunger, only a spiral that wound tighter and tighter until everything inside it was part of the same story. Pit surged and the ground gave way. I felt arms flailing, lungs burning, and as the darkness swallowed me, I felt hands cold, wet, seizing my limbs, pulling me down into the spiral. And the last thing I saw before the light was gone was the trail sign standing above the hole, its letters glowing faint and endless. Turn back, and then nothing but the whistle carrying